Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the world. The man who didn't just dream of ruling the world, he very nearly did. His story is one of genius and brutality, of glory and blood, of brilliance wrapped in ambition so boundless it consumed empires and men alike. Step into a world where kings are murdered, gods are challenged, and one man's thirst for power leaves a trail of shattered dynasties in his wake. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia. His father, King Philip II, was a ruthless military genius and also a notorious womanizer. His mother, Queen Olympias, was no less intense. Deeply religious and rumored to sleep with snakes as part of her Dionysian rituals, she told young Alexander that he was not just royal, but divine. She claimed he was descended from Achilles and possibly fathered by Zeus himself. Even as a child, Alexander revealed both brilliance and danger. At 13, he was sent to study under the great philosopher Aristotle. He devoured philosophy, science, and poetry, but his deepest obsession was the Iliad. He idolized Achilles, reportedly sleeping with a copy of the epic beneath his pillow. But Alexander did not just want to read about heroes, he wanted to become one. By the age of 16, he had crushed rebellions and founded his first city. Behind the glory, however, was a palace riddled with tension. When King Philip remarried, threatening Alexander's position as heir, the rift between father and son deepened. Then, at a royal wedding, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. Officially, the murder was pinned on personal motives, but whispers suggested a darker truth. Some believed Queen Olympias orchestrated the hit. Others speculated that Alexander himself was involved. The truth died with the king. At just 20 years old, Alexander took the throne and immediately began eliminating rivals. He ordered the execution of family members, former allies, and even infants with royal blood. Ruthless and calculating, he would tolerate no challenge to his rule. Once Greece was secured, Alexander looked east toward the mighty Persian Empire. Before setting out, he visited the Oracle of Delphi to seek divine guidance. When the priestess refused to prophesy, Alexander dragged her to the altar until she screamed, "You are invincible." That was all he needed to hear. In 334 BC, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. At the Battle of Granicus, he came close to death when a Persian noble nearly cleaved his skull with an axe. A general intervened just in time, saving his life. Alexander would reward loyalty fiercely, but betrayal would be met with unspeakable cruelty. 3 years later, at the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander faced Darius III. He was outnumbered, but his tactics were brilliant. He led a devastating cavalry charge that broke the Persian lines and sent Darius fleeing for his life. Alexander pursued him relentlessly. When he finally found Darius's corpse, murdered by his own men, Alexander ordered the assassins executed. He wept over the dead king, not out of compassion, but because he had been denied the satisfaction of killing him personally. In a drunken celebration after conquering Persepolis, Alexander and his men set fire to the Persian royal palace. Some say it was revenge for the Persian sack of Athens. Others say it was a whim, incited by a courtesan named Thais. Whether it was vengeance or vanity, Alexander watched the ancient symbol of Persian power burn to ash. In Egypt, Alexander was embraced as a god. He founded Alexandria, a city that would become the center of ancient knowledge and science. But the real turning point came when he traveled into the Libyan desert to consult the Oracle of Siwa. The priests there told him what he had always suspected, that he was not merely the son of a king, but the son of Zeus Ammon. Whether they truly believed it or feared him too much to say otherwise, the message was clear. Alexander now saw himself as divine. Obsessed with conquest, he pushed eastward through Central Asia and into India. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, he clashed with King Porus, whose war elephants sent fear through the Macedonian ranks. The battle was brutal and nearly ended in disaster, but Alexander emerged victorious. He was so impressed with Porus's courage that he made him an ally instead of a prisoner. Even in conquest, Alexander recognized power when he saw it. But as the army pushed further into India, Alexander's men broke. Exhausted by years of war, alien terrain, and unbearable climate, they finally refused to go any farther. Furious and heartbroken, Alexander turned back. He chose a deadly route home through the burning deserts of Gedrosia, where thousands died from starvation, exhaustion, and thirst. Some historians believe it was not a strategic misstep, but a deliberate punishment. In 323 BC, Alexander returned to Babylon. During a banquet, he suddenly fell ill. For days, he lay paralyzed and feverish. Some sources say he died from malaria. Others suspect typhoid fever, and a few claim he was poisoned by one of his own generals. The most chilling theory is that he was buried alive, still conscious but unable to move, a victim of a rare neurological condition. Strangely, his body did not decompose for several days. His followers called it a sign of his divinity. On his deathbed, his generals asked to whom he would leave his empire. He answered simply, "To the strongest." That answer unleashed decades of bloodshed, known as the Wars of the Diadochi. His generals carved the empire into rival kingdoms. His wife Roxana and young son were eventually murdered. His mother Olympias was executed. His bloodline was extinguished. And yet, Alexander's legacy survived. He had spread Greek language and culture across 3 continents. He forged the Hellenistic world, a melting pot of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian influences. His city Alexandria became the crown jewel of knowledge, home to the greatest library the ancient world would ever know. His life became legend, studied by Caesar, idolized by Napoleon, and feared by those who followed. He died at 32, but no general before or after matched his speed, ambition, and sheer dominance. Alexander once said, "I would rather live a short life of glory than a long one of obscurity." And he did exactly that. His legacy is etched not just in the cities he built or the wars he won, but in the dreams of every conqueror who came after him. Tonight, let the ghost of Alexander walk through your dreams, proud, blood-soaked, and burning with divine ambition. Not just the boy who conquered the world, but the man who tried to become a god. Sweet dreams, traveler. Juluis Caesar, the man who shaped Rome. The man whose ambition, genius, and relentless pursuit of power transformed the Roman Republic into an empire. His story is soaked in glory and betrayal, filled with military brilliance, political seduction, and a murder so famous it echoes through the centuries. Close your eyes and enter the world of ancient Rome, a world of marble temples and bloody swords, where destiny was written not in ink, but in the blood of rivals. Juluis Caesar was born in the year 100 BC into the Juluis family. Though noble in blood, they had little power at the time. But Caesar carried something stronger than status, a belief that he was born for greatness. His family claimed descent from Venus, the goddess of love, and Caesar never let anyone forget it. At 16, his father died suddenly, leaving Caesar as the head of his household. Rome, at the time, was teetering on the edge of collapse. Corruption ran rampant, and civil unrest boiled in the streets. When the dictator Sulla took power, Caesar made a bold and nearly fatal decision. He refused to divorce his wife Cornelia, who was from a rival political faction. Sulla spared him reluctantly, but issued a chilling warning. In this Caesar there are many Mariuses. It was not a compliment. It was a prophecy. To avoid execution, Caesar fled Rome and joined the military. There he proved himself not just brave, but ruthless. He captured enemy towns, saved a legion under siege, and won Rome's highest military honor, the civic crown. But the real story came during his capture by pirates. While sailing near the Aegean Sea, Caesar was kidnapped by Cilician pirates. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar laughed and told them they were insulting him. He demanded they raise it to 50. For over a month, Caesar lived among them, joking, reciting poetry, and telling them, with eerie calm, that he would crucify every one of them once he was free. He kept that promise. After he was ransomed, he raised a private fleet, hunted the pirates down, and had them crucified. Every last one. Back in Rome, Caesar rose swiftly. He was brilliant, charismatic, and dangerously persuasive. As a lawyer, he captivated juries. As a politician, he knew how to win hearts, and when needed, buy them. He climbed through the ranks of Roman politics, all while making powerful allies and more dangerous enemies. He aligned himself with Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, and Pompey, the most celebrated general. Together, they formed the first triumvirate, an alliance of raw ambition that dominated the Republic. But these were not friends. They were predators watching each other closely. In 58 BC, Caesar was appointed governor of Gaul. That title gave him control over legions, money, and power, and he wielded all of it with terrifying effectiveness. Over the next 8 years, he slaughtered entire tribes, enslaved hundreds of thousands, and stretched Rome's borders deep into what is now France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. His campaigns were brutal. During the Gallic Wars, Caesar bragged in his own writings about killing over 1 million people. These accounts, written in third person, were less history than calculated propaganda, but they worked. Back in Rome, the people loved him. The Senate, however, feared him. At Alesia, Caesar faced his greatest military challenge against the Gallic leader Vercingetorix. Outnumbered and surrounded, Caesar built double fortifications, one to hold the city inside and another to defend against an attacking relief army. It was a military miracle. He won, and Vercingetorix was paraded through the streets of Rome in chains before being strangled to death. As Caesar's fame grew, so did tensions with Pompey. Crassus died in battle, and Pompey turned against his old ally. The Senate, now under Pompey's influence, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar did not obey. In 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legion, knowing it was an act of war. He is said to have muttered, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. He had chosen war over surrender. He marched on Rome. Pompey fled. Caesar hunted him across the Mediterranean, defeating him in Greece, then pursuing him to Egypt. There, Caesar walked into yet another storm. Pompey had already been murdered by Egyptian officials, hoping to win Caesar's favor. Instead, Caesar was horrified. He reportedly wept at the sight of Pompey's severed head. Not out of grief, but because a Roman general, even a rival, deserved better. In Egypt, Caesar met Cleopatra. She famously arrived hidden in a rug, unrolled before him like a gift. Their affair was as political as it was sexual. Cleopatra gave birth to his son, Caesarion, though Rome would never officially acknowledge the boy. Caesar returned to Rome in triumph and was named dictator for life. He passed sweeping reforms, revising the calendar, stabilizing debt, offering citizenship to outsiders, and reining in corruption. But his consolidation of power was seen by many as the death of the Republic. Dozens of senators, including his closest allies, conspired against him. They feared that Caesar wanted to make himself king. On March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, he walked into the Senate chamber, unaware that it would be his last. He was surrounded and stabbed 23 times. Among the assassins was Brutus, whom Caesar had loved like a son. According to legend, Caesar looked him in the eyes and said, "Et tu, Brute, and you too, Brutus." He fell at the base of Pompey's statue, soaked in blood, a poetic and gruesome end. But killing Caesar did not restore the Republic. It shattered it completely. Civil war erupted once more, and from the ashes rose his adopted heir, Octavian, who would become Augustus, the first true emperor of Rome. Caesar's name lived on long after his body turned to dust. The word Caesar became a title, not just in Rome, but in Russia as Czar, and in Germany as Kaiser. His legacy shaped empires for centuries. He once said, "I came, I saw, I conquered." But what he left behind was far more complex, a legacy of power, transformation, and betrayal. Tonight, let the ghost of Julius Caesar whisper through your dreams, a man who dared to rule not just Rome, but history itself, a man who was feared, worshipped, betrayed, and ultimately immortalized. Sleep well, traveler, and remember, even greatness can bleed. Ramses II, the pharaoh who defied time. The mighty pharaoh who ruled Egypt with unmatched authority and splendor. Known across the ancient world as Ramses the Great, he was more than a ruler. He was a god in the flesh, a warlord, a propaganda master, and the most prolific builder Egypt ever knew. His name became a weapon, a myth, and a legend. His reign was a story of ambition, obsession, and near immortality. He sought to carve his name into eternity by sheer force of stone, war, and ego. Close your eyes and step into a world of golden sands, immense temples, and the ruler who refused to be forgotten. Ramses II was born in 1303 before Christ, son of Pharaoh Seti I and Queen Tuya, in the height of the 19th dynasty. His father trained him in warfare and royal ceremony, taking the boy on military campaigns that scorched into his mind the path to godlike dominion. At just 14 years old, Ramses was made co-ruler with his father, a move designed to groom him for absolute power. When Seti died, Ramses inherited the throne and transformed himself into a living god. He ruled for 66 years, an extraordinary reign that outlasted his enemies, his wives, many of his own children, and perhaps his humanity. Ramses II was a military showman. His most famous campaign, the Battle of Kadesh, was a brutal clash against the Hittite Empire. It took place in 1274 before Christ and became one of the largest chariot battles ever recorded. Ramses's army walked into a well-planned ambush, and many of his men were slaughtered. But here is what textbooks rarely tell you. Ramses did not win that battle. It was a draw at best. The truth was buried under stone carvings and temple reliefs that Ramses commissioned to show himself as a god of war, single-handedly defeating entire armies. These were ancient propaganda films etched in granite. The story was repeated on walls across Egypt until it became truth in the minds of the people. Years later, he signed the Treaty of Kadesh, the first known written peace treaty in history. But even that was inscribed only after both Egypt and the Hittites were too exhausted to continue fighting. It was not peace through victory. It was peace through necessity. Ramses II was not just a king. He was a builder of impossible ambition. He covered Egypt with monuments of his face. Some historians believe he built more statues of himself than any other human in history. The most jaw-dropping of all was the great temple of Abu Simbel, carved deep into the cliffside above the Nile. Each of the 4 seated statues at its entrance stands over 60 feet tall, each one of them Ramses. The temple was engineered so that twice a year, the sun would pierce the darkness and illuminate the inner sanctum, shining directly on his statue, bathing it in gold light like divine coronation. But Ramses was obsessed with erasing the names of past rulers and replacing them with his own. Many monuments that appear to be his were originally built by his father or even earlier pharaohs. Ramses simply chiseled away their names and replaced them with his own, rewriting history in stone. His hunger for legacy was insatiable. He was also a lover and a father to excess. Ramses had over 200 wives and concubines. His most beloved was Queen Nefertari, whose tomb is considered one of the most beautifully decorated in all of Egypt. He immortalized her in art and built the Temple of Hathor in her honor, inscribing it with the words, "For the one for whom the sun shines." But behind the romance was ruthless dynasty building. He fathered over 100 children. Some scholars estimate the number could be closer to 200. His sons were appointed as generals, priests, and governors, but most of them never outlived him. He outlasted nearly all of his heirs. By the time he died at around 90 years old, many of his descendants were buried beneath the sand, and the line of succession was in chaos. Ramses declared himself a god, not just a king. He promoted the worship of his own image and integrated himself into the religion of the state. He was portrayed alongside Amun and Ra, the great gods of Egypt, suggesting not just divine favor but divine identity. His temples were places of worship, of himself. He spent decades reshaping Egypt's religious landscape to center on his rule. Some scholars believe this was a political reaction to the radical monotheism of Akhenaten, a former pharaoh who had tried to erase the old gods. Ramses restored the gods and added himself to the pantheon. When he died, his tomb in the Valley of the Kings was filled with treasure and grandeur, but grave robbers struck soon after. His body was eventually moved multiple times by priests to protect it from desecration. It was found in 1881, placed among other royal mummies in a secret cache. Today, his face still survives in astonishing detail at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. His skin preserved, his jaw clenched, as if still commanding an empire from the shadows. And here is the final twist of immortality. When his mummy was flown to France in 1976 for preservation work, he was issued an Egyptian passport. His occupation was listed as king, deceased. Ramses II, 3,000 years dead, crossed international borders as a recognized monarch. As our journey through the world of Ramses comes to an end, remember this: he was not just a pharaoh. He was a god by decree, a builder by obsession, and a master of illusion who manipulated history with the stroke of a chisel. His name survived not because he was good, but because he was unforgettable. He once declared, "I am Ramses, ruler of rulers. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." That line, later echoed in Shelley's poem, now stands as a warning. Even the greatest empires crumble, but some names refuse to die. Tonight, let the spirit of Ramses the Great whisper into your dreams, not with peace but with the fire of ambition, the hunger for legacy, and the chilling truth that immortality can be bought, in blood, in stone, and in fear. Sleep well, traveler of ancient empires. Genghis Khan, the conqueror of empires. The man who emerged from the windswept Mongolian steppes to forge the largest land empire in human history. His rise was not just epic, it was blood-soaked, relentless, and calculated. This is the story of a man who turned vengeance into an empire and shattered kingdoms with a philosophy carved by hardship. Close your eyes and step into a world where loyalty was survival, betrayal meant death, and thunderous hooves crushed civilizations beneath them. Genghis Khan was born as Temujin around 1162, near the Onon River. He was not born to greatness. He was born into betrayal. His father, Yesugei, was a tribal chief who tried to bind his fragile rule with oaths and shaky alliances. But one evening, while traveling, he was poisoned by the very people he trusted. Temujin was just 9. The clan abandoned the family. His mother, Holun, fed the children scraps and roots. Starvation stalked them like a wolf. Temujin learned quickly. Kindness was rare, and mercy was weakness. At one point, he was captured and enslaved by a rival tribe. He wore a wooden collar around his neck. Humiliation burned into his soul. He escaped with the help of a guard who pitied him, but Temujin never forgot. That brand of betrayal and powerlessness would shape his empire, one where loyalty was rewarded absolutely, and betrayal was punished with horror. He began gathering followers, not nobles, but outcasts, orphans, and warriors who had nothing left to lose. These men bled for him not because of his bloodline, but because he promised them a new order. Power through merit, status through bravery. It was revolutionary. Temujin even went so far as to promote former enemies if they proved their loyalty. His philosophy was simple. If a man can ride, fight, and obey, he is Mongol. He married Borte, his childhood love. But even that bond was forged through fire. She was kidnapped by the Merkits, an enemy tribe. Temujin rescued her in a violent raid, but her abduction left a mark on both of them. Her firstborn son, Jochi, was likely conceived during captivity. To this day, historians debate whether Jochi was Temujin's biological son. Genghis Khan never publicly questioned it, but privately, the doubt poisoned his succession planning. He formed a blood brotherhood with Jamuka, a fellow warlord. They fought side by side until ambition broke the bond. Their final battle was brutal. Temujin emerged victorious. Jamuka was captured. Offered a high rank in the new Mongol order, Jamuka refused. Temujin had him executed, not with a sword, but by having his back broken. A method reserved for nobility, ensuring no blood was spilled, a gruesome gesture of both respect and finality. In 1206, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The fractured Mongol tribes were now an unstoppable war machine. His armies were like shadows that consumed kingdoms. He revolutionized warfare. He used fake retreats, psychological manipulation, and absolute discipline. He recruited siege engineers from China and Persia. He used biological warfare, catapulting plague-infected corpses over city walls. Cities that resisted him were obliterated. In Nishapur, after one of his sons-in-law was killed, Genghis ordered the slaughter of every inhabitant. Reports claim over 100,000 people died in a single week. their skulls stacked in pyramids outside the city gates. He invaded the Khwarezmian Empire after its ruler killed Mongol envoys. That mistake would lead to one of the most brutal military campaigns in history. Genghis Khan unleashed such ferocity that entire cities were depopulated. In Bukhara, he entered the city's mosque and declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me." And yet, Genghis was not a mindless destroyer. He valued information. He created a postal system called the Yam that stretched thousands of miles. He ensured safe passage for traders and diplomats, knowing that commerce was power. He invited scholars, engineers, and religious leaders to his court. His empire allowed Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and shamans to practice freely, so long as they submitted to him. He kept multiple wives and countless concubines. Geneticists estimate that 1 in every 200 men alive today is a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. His bloodline, quite literally, changed the face of humanity. In 1227, during a campaign against the Western Sia, Genghis Khan fell from his horse and sustained internal injuries. He died later that year, but the cause remains a mystery. Some say it was the injury. Others whisper it was an assassin. Still others believe he was castrated by a captured princess before he died. Whatever the truth, his death was kept secret for months to prevent unrest. His burial was legendary. His funeral procession killed anyone who saw it. Rivers were diverted over his grave to conceal its location. Horses trampled the ground to erase any trace. To this day, no one has found his tomb. Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror. He was a system builder, a code writer, and a brutal visionary. His laws forbade the kidnapping of women, theft of livestock, and fighting among soldiers. He believed in total loyalty, and he enforced it with terror and rewards alike. He once said, "It is not sufficient that I succeed. All others must fail." So tonight, let the spirit of Genghis Khan ride through your dreams. Feel the icy wind of the steppes, the fire of revenge, and the echo of hooves across forgotten empires. Sleep well, dear traveler. The conqueror's story never truly ends. It waits quietly beneath the earth. Ashoka the Great, the emperor who chose peace, who began his reign soaked in blood and ended it preaching nonviolence to the world. This is not the story of a saint. This is the story of a man who murdered his way to the throne, crushed a kingdom into dust, and then stood over the corpses asking himself what kind of man he had become. It is a tale of redemption, yes, but born from horror and soaked in regret. Ashoka was born in 304 BC into the Maurya dynasty, a royal bloodline that ruled over a fractured and violent Indian subcontinent. His grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, had seized power with the help of the cunning philosopher Chanakya, building an empire of force and fear. His father, Bindusara, continued that tradition. But Ashoka was not the chosen heir. He was a secondary son, ignored, underestimated, and cast into the shadows of the palace. It was there, in that darkness, that something ruthless began to grow. Trained in the art of war, Ashoka proved himself early with brutal campaigns, especially in the city of Taxila, where he crushed a rebellion by slaughtering its leaders and allegedly burning the city. He became known as Chand Ashoka, meaning Ashoka the Fierce. When his father died, the court erupted into civil war. Ashoka wiped out his brothers, with legends claiming he killed as many as 99 of them. Whether that number is exaggerated or not, the truth is clear. He bathed in blood to secure the throne. Once in power, Ashoka set his sights on the one kingdom that refused to submit to Mauryan rule, Kalinga. In 261 BC, he invaded with overwhelming force. The war that followed was among the bloodiest in ancient Indian history. Over 100,000 were killed, and at least 150,000 civilians were taken as prisoners. The rivers of Kalinga ran red, and the land was filled with pyres. There are accounts that claim the screams of the dying echoed for days, but Ashoka did not celebrate. Instead, he walked the battlefield, broken by the carnage he had caused. In that moment of death and devastation, something inside him snapped. The man who had once slit throats without blinking turned to Buddhism, not because of peace, but because he could no longer bear the weight of his own sins. It was not a gentle conversion. It was a desperate grasp at salvation. He renounced violence. He disbanded the death squads that had once secured his rule. He issued the Edicts of Ashoka, messages carved into stone pillars and boulders across the empire in the common tongue, not the sacred Sanskrit of the elite. These messages were raw, personal, and filled with regret. He confessed his grief over Kalinga. He begged his people to live with compassion, to respect all religions, to avoid killing, and to treat even servants and animals with kindness. One inscription simply states that Ashoka now finds joy not in conquest, but in spreading the Dharma, the way of righteousness. He became a ruler obsessed with moral reform. He abolished capital punishment, banned animal sacrifice, and built hospitals for both humans and animals, a radical idea at the time. He sent out missionaries to far-off lands including Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and possibly even the Mediterranean. Under his reign, Buddhism became a force that would reshape Asia. And yet, not all was perfect. His reforms angered the Brahmins, the priestly class, and weakened the militaristic foundations of the Mauryan Empire. After his death, the empire crumbled, but Ashoka's vision did not. The Dharma Chakra, the wheel of law etched on his monuments, became the symbol on modern India's flag. The lion capital he commissioned now stands as India's national emblem. He may have failed to save his empire, but he planted a philosophy that outlived empires. Ashoka ruled for nearly 4 decades, haunted by the screams of Kalinga. He became one of the first rulers in history to openly declare that moral authority was more important than military might. He said, "The only true conquest is the conquest of the self." And he lived that truth until the end. Let this story remind you that even the most ruthless soul can be reborn. Even the fiercest emperor can learn to kneel. Ashoka the Great, conqueror of men, was ultimately conquered by his own conscience. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, remember the man who chose peace over blood, who carved his regrets into stone for the world to see. Let his voice echo in your dreams, not with commands, but with compassion. Charlemagne, father of Europe, and the warrior king who forged Western Europe from fractured tribes into a sprawling empire and planted the seeds of the Holy Roman Empire. His story is one of ambition and bloodshed, vision and ruthlessness. A tale of a ruler whose iron will reshape an entire continent and whose shadow still looms over Europe's destiny. Charlemagne was born in 747 AD, the son of Pepin the Short, a man who wrested power from the old Merovingian dynasty and crowned himself king with the blessing of the Pope. His lineage was one of ambition and warfare, but his early years are shrouded in mystery, marked by brutal power struggles and a childhood where survival meant strength. When his father died in 768, Charlemagne inherited the Frankish kingdom along with his brother Carloman. The brothers were rivals, each wary of the other's claim. Their uneasy alliance shattered when Carloman died suddenly, possibly poisoned, leaving Charlemagne as the sole ruler. With no rivals left, he unleashed his full force on the fractured lands around him. His military campaigns were relentless and merciless. The 30-year war against the pagan Saxons was brutal and unforgiving. Charlemagne sought not only to conquer, but to erase their culture. Thousands of Saxons who refused to convert to Christianity were executed in the infamous massacre of Verdun, where the king reportedly ordered the slaughter of 4,500 prisoners in a single day. This act of terror sealed Saxon submission and the forced spread of Christianity. Charlemagne also crushed the Lombards in Italy, claiming the title King of the Lombards, and extended his reach into Spain, pushing back Muslim forces. He defeated the Avars, a nomadic tribe in Central Europe, expanding his empire to the Danube River. His realm stretched from the Pyrenees to the North Sea, from the Atlantic Ocean to Italy, a patchwork of peoples bound by his sword and faith. On Christmas Day in the year 800, a moment forever etched in history unfolded. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope's act was a bold political move, linking Frankish power with the legacy of ancient Rome and setting the stage for centuries of church and state entanglement. Charlemagne accepted the crown, a symbol of divine authority and a new Western empire. But the coronation also sowed seeds of tension between the papacy and imperial power. Charlemagne's vision stretched beyond conquest. He dreamed of a united Christendom, a realm ruled by law, faith, and learning. He was a warrior who understood the power of knowledge. His reign sparked the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of education, literature, and culture in a dark age. He invited scholars from across Europe, including the famed Alcuin of York, to his court in Aachen. Together, they copied manuscripts, preserved classical texts, and established schools that became centers of learning. Charlemagne himself was no mere soldier. He studied Latin and some Greek, insisted on literacy among his nobles, and reformed the legal system to bring order to his sprawling empire. His written laws, the capitularies, regulated everything from justice to religious observance. He established the missi dominici, royal agents sent across the empire to enforce his policies, check on local officials, and root out corruption. He enforced Christian morals strictly, promoting the church's dominance and cracking down on pagan practices. His brutal wars of conversion and harsh punishments ensured the spread of Christianity, but at great cost to those who resisted. Charlemagne ruled for 46 years, leaving behind a legacy that shaped medieval Europe. After his death in 814, his empire fractured under his grandson's quarrels, birthing the kingdoms of France, Germany, and Italy. Yet his vision of a united Christian empire lived on, inspiring emperors, popes, and kings for centuries. His story is immortalized in the epic Song of Roland, where his might and justice are mythologized. But behind the legend lies a man of ambition and iron will who shaped the destiny of a continent through blood and faith. As our journey through Charlemagne's world ends, reflect on the warrior who united tribes, crowned himself emperor, and lit a flame of learning in a dark time. He once said, "Right action is better than knowledge, but in order to do what is right, we must know what is right." His legacy is not just the empire he forged, but the vision of unity, faith, and knowledge he dared to dream. Tonight, let the spirit of Charlemagne guide your dreams, filling them with courage, wisdom, and the fire to change the world. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who ruled an empire. Her story is soaked in intrigue, danger, and ruthless survival, a tale of a woman who wielded power in a world ruled by men, surviving betrayals, plots, and the haunting shadows of her mother's execution, to become one of history's most enigmatic and feared rulers. Close your eyes and step into a world of gilded courts veined with poison and whispers, where ambition could kill as easily as a sword, and a queen's will was law. Elizabeth Tudor was born on September 7, 1533, a fragile pawn in the deadly game of Tudor succession. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was a queen whose fate was sealed by scandal, betrayal, and the merciless jealousy of a king desperate for a son. When Elizabeth was just 2, Anne's head fell to the executioner's axe, and the girl was declared illegitimate, cast out from royal favor and thrust into a perilous existence beneath the cold gaze of her father, Henry VIII. From the shadows of her mother's fall, Elizabeth forged an armor of intelligence and wit. Her education was unrivaled. Latin, Greek, French, Italian, each language a weapon she wielded with precision. But her survival demanded more than books. It required a steel will and an uncanny political instinct, born from years of imprisonment, suspicion, and the constant threat of death. The reign of her half-sister Mary was a dark chapter. Elizabeth, seen as a threat to the Catholic Queen's throne, was locked away in the Tower of London, where death was a breath away. Accused of treason in a web of religious and political machinations, Elizabeth survived through a delicate dance of diplomacy, patience, and unshakable resolve. But even as queen, Elizabeth's court was a poison garden. Her closest confidant, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, was the subject of scandal and whispered rumors. The mysterious death of his wife, Amy Robsart, who fell down a staircase under suspicious circumstances, cast a shadow over Dudley's relationship with the Queen. Many believed Elizabeth's affection for Dudley bordered on love, yet the scandal poisoned their connection, and rumors swirled of court intrigues and secret plots. Her relationship with Mary, Queen of Scots, was fraught with danger and betrayal. Elizabeth's cousin was a Catholic claimant to the English throne and a focal point for conspiracies to dethrone Elizabeth. The Babington Plot, a chilling conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne, was uncovered by Elizabeth's spies. The brutal interrogation and execution of Mary sent shockwaves through Europe, yet Elizabeth bore the burden of condemning a fellow queen and cousin, a dark stain on her reign. The Queen's court was riddled with spies and poisoners. The infamous Sir Francis Walsingham ran a vast intelligence network, uncovering plots against Elizabeth's life, including the Ridolfi plot and the Throckmorton plot, conspiracies involving Spain and the papacy to replace Elizabeth with Mary. Each plot tightened the noose of paranoia around the Queen, forcing her to rule with a cold and calculating hand. Elizabeth's refusal to marry was a strategic choice steeped in political complexity. Suitors came and went: Philip of Spain, the Duke of Anjou, and even Robert Dudley himself. Yet marriage threatened to dilute her power or embroil England in dangerous alliances. Her vow of virginity was as much a political weapon as a personal stance, a vow that kept her throne secure, but isolated her in a court hungry for scandal. Despite the Queen's austere public image, her private life was a theater of mystery and whispered gossip. Some historians speculate that Elizabeth engaged in secret romances, perhaps with Dudley or other courtiers, but she wielded her image as a virgin queen to control her realm and maintain the mystique of her sovereignty. The threat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 was the crucible that forged her legend. King Philip II of Spain sought to crush Protestant England and restore Catholic rule with overwhelming force. Faced with invasion, Elizabeth's speech at Tilbury revealed the iron beneath her regal grace. Clad in armor, she declared, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." Her words kindled fierce loyalty in a nation standing on the brink of annihilation. The battle that followed was brutal and desperate. England's smaller, swifter fleet outmaneuvered the Spanish Leviathan, aided by fierce storms that scattered the Armada. England's victory was not just military, but psychological, forever altering the balance of power in Europe and marking the dawn of English naval supremacy. Elizabeth's court was a cauldron of brilliance and danger. The arts flourished in an age of poets and playwrights who whispered truths beneath layers of metaphor and spectacle. William Shakespeare penned tragedies and comedies that dissected the human soul, his works shadowed by the tensions of a turbulent reign. Behind the ornate tapestries and lavish banquets lurked spies, assassins, and political conspirators, each eager to unseat the queen or sway her favor. Elizabeth herself was a study in contradictions, an accomplished poet and musician with a sharp tongue and a cunning mind, yet haunted by paranoia and the ghosts of lost love and betrayal. Her secret romances and rumored affairs were cloaked in mystery, fueling endless speculation. Under Elizabeth's rule, England's ambitions stretched across oceans. She backed explorers like Sir Francis Drake, a privateer who plundered Spanish ships and circled the globe, enriching the crown and stoking the fires of empire. Sir Walter Raleigh's ventures in the New World planted the seeds of colonization, laying the groundwork for a British Empire that would reshape the world. For 45 years, Elizabeth ruled with a blend of charm and ruthless pragmatism, steering England through storms of religious upheaval, assassination plots, and foreign wars. She outlived lovers, advisors, and enemies alike, maintaining her throne in a world where queens were often dethroned by poison or steel. Her death in 1603 marked the end of the Tudor dynasty, but her spirit lingered. She left a kingdom transformed, poised on the edge of empire, rich in culture, and fiercely proud. Her successor, James I of Scotland, inherited not only her crown, but her complicated legacy. As our journey through Elizabeth's world ends, take one last look at the queen who turned survival into an art and wielded power with a will of iron wrapped in velvet. She once said, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." Her legacy lives on not just in the empire she ruled, but in the dark brilliance and unyielding spirit she inspired. Tonight, let the spirit of Queen Elizabeth I guide your dreams, filling them with cunning, resilience, and the fierce fire to command your destiny. Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who dreamed of glory. The military genius who rose from obscurity to become emperor of the French. His story is one of ambition, strategy, and destiny, a tale of a man who conquered Europe and reshaped the modern world. Close your eyes and step into a world of grand battles, glittering palaces, and a ruler whose dreams of empire changed history. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, shortly after it became a French territory. His family belonged to minor Italian nobility, but lacked wealth. From a young age, Napoleon was determined to rise above his humble beginnings. Sent to France to study at the Royal Military School, he excelled in mathematics, history, and military strategy. By 16, he had become a second lieutenant in the artillery. Driven by ambition and a burning desire for glory, He possessed fierce intelligence, discipline, and an indomitable will to succeed. As the French Revolution erupted, Napoleon's loyalty to the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity shaped his political vision. Yet he saw in the chaos an opportunity for greatness. Napoleon's military career soared when he defended the revolutionary government during the siege of Toulon in 1793. His brilliant artillery tactics earned him the rank of brigadier general at just 24 years old. He continued to rise through the ranks, leading a daring expedition to Italy in 1796. With unmatched strategic genius, he defeated the Austrian forces, securing French control over northern Italy. His soldiers adored him, calling him Le Petit Caporal, the Little Corporal, for his courage and leadership. Returning to France as a hero, Napoleon launched the Egyptian campaign in 1798, seeking to disrupt British trade routes. Though his fleet was destroyed by Admiral Nelson at the Battle of the Nile, he made significant scientific discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone, which unlocked the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphs. France was in turmoil, plagued by political corruption and an economic crisis. Sensing an opportunity, Napoleon staged a coup on the 18th of Brumaire, November 9, 1799, overthrowing the Directory and establishing the consulate with himself as first consul. He declared, "I found the crown of France lying on the ground, and I picked it up with my sword." With his charismatic leadership and political acumen, he restored order, stability, and prosperity to France. In 1704, he crowned himself Emperor of the French in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, symbolizing his supremacy and independence from the Church. The age of Napoleon had begun. Napoleon embarked on a series of military campaigns known as the Napoleonic Wars, expanding his empire across Europe. He defeated Austria and Russia at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, his most brilliant victory, earning him the title Master of Europe. He crushed Prussia at the Battle of Jena and occupied Berlin. In 1707, he signed the Treaty of Tilsit with Tsar Alexander I of Russia, dividing Europe between them. His empire stretched from Spain to Poland, dominating the European continent. He introduced the Napoleonic Code, a legal system that abolished feudal privileges and promoted civil rights, influencing legal systems worldwide. However, his ambition led to the ill-fated Peninsular War in Spain and the disastrous Russian campaign of 1812. The harsh Russian winter and scorched earth tactics devastated his grand army, marking the beginning of his decline. After his retreat from Russia, Napoleon faced a coalition of European powers united against him. At the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, he was defeated and forced to abdicate. In 1814, exiled to the island of Elba, he plotted his return. In 1815, he escaped Elba and marched back to Paris in the 100 Days, reclaiming his throne. But his comeback was short-lived. At the Battle of Waterloo, he faced the combined forces of Britain and Prussia. Defeated by the Duke of Wellington, his empire crumbled. He was exiled to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic, where he spent his final years reflecting on his legacy. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died, reportedly whispering his last words. France, army, head of the army, Josephine. Napoleon's impact on history is unparalleled. He modernized France's administration, economy, and education. His Napoleonic Code became the foundation of legal systems across Europe and Latin America. His military tactics are studied by generals to this day, inspiring leaders from Wellington to Eisenhower. His vision of a united Europe influenced the creation of the European Union. Yet his ambition led to devastating wars, leaving millions dead. He was both a hero and a conqueror, a visionary and a tyrant, a man whose complex legacy defies simple judgment. As our journey through Napoleon's world comes to an end, take one last look at the man who dared to dream of empire. He once said, "Impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools." His legacy is not merely in the lands he conquered, but in the spirit of ambition and determination he inspired. Tonight, let the spirit of Napoleon Bonaparte guide your dreams, filling them with courage, ambition, and the drive to shape your destiny. Cyrus the Great, the King of Kings. Let us journey through the life and legacy of Cyrus the Great, the visionary ruler who forged the Persian Empire and rose as one of history's most enigmatic and revered kings. His story is one of conquest and cunning, justice and ruthlessness, a tale of a man who wielded not only the sword, but the power of mercy and diplomacy to build an empire that would echo through the ages. Close your eyes and step into a world of sun-scorched deserts, towering ziggurats, and shadowed courts where whispers of betrayal and destiny intertwined beneath the golden glare of a merciless sun. Cyrus II was born around 600 BC in the rugged Persian heartland, in lands that now lie within modern Iran. His birth was shadowed by a prophecy darker than the night itself. His grandfather, King Aegeus of Media, tormented by a dream of his own downfall, ordered the infant Cyrus's death. But fate, and the compassion of a humble herdsman, spared the child who would one day shatter empires. Raised in secrecy and hardship, Cyrus grew strong, his mind as sharp as the swords he would command. When the time came, he turned his blade against his grandfather, overthrowing the Median king and uniting Persians and Medes under a single banner. From that fractured beginning rose the Achaemenid Empire, vast and unstoppable. But Cyrus was no mere brute conqueror. His armies moved like shadows, disciplined and swift, employing not just force but fear and cunning. His victories over kingdoms like Lydia were marked by brilliant strategy and by a calculated mercy. When he captured Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king famed for his gold, Cyrus spared his life, not out of kindness alone, but to send a message. A new kind of ruler had arrived, one who wielded power with wisdom as well as might. His empire grew eastward, swallowing tribes and cities until his eyes turned toward Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia. The city's massive walls were said impregnable, but Cyrus struck not with brute force, but with guile. Diverting the great Euphrates River, he sent his troops under Babylon's gates through the dry riverbed, an audacious plan that brought the city to its knees without the devastation of battle. Yet the true legacy of Cyrus was born not in conquest, but in his unprecedented vision of governance. He declared himself not conqueror, but liberator, freeing the oppressed and honoring the customs of the many peoples under his rule. Most famously, he allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, an act recorded on the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay testament to the earliest known declaration of human rights, extolling religious freedom, tolerance, and justice. This was a man who understood the brittle nature of the empire, not held by iron alone, but by the fragile threads of loyalty, culture, and respect. Unlike the despots before and after him, Cyrus ruled through respect for diversity, allowing traditions to survive, turning former enemies into loyal subjects. But beneath this enlightened facade lay the darker realities of power. His empire was maintained by an efficient and often ruthless system of control. Spies, local governors, and a network of messengers ensured obedience, while rebellions were crushed without mercy. The Massage Tea campaign, his last, revealed the brutal limits of even his rule, facing a nomadic queen who sought revenge for her son's death. Cyrus met a violent end, his body lost or desecrated according to some accounts. His tomb in Pasargadae remains a silent monument, humble yet imposing, to a ruler who shaped the destiny of the ancient world. Cyrus's empire stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, a mosaic of peoples and cultures welded together under his iron will and enlightened ideals. His successors, Darius the Great and Xerxes, expanded and hardened this legacy. But it was Cyrus's vision of fair rule and respect that set the foundation for empires yet to come. His governance influenced rulers from Alexander the Great, who saw him as a model conqueror, to modern democracies inspired by his ideas of justice and tolerance. His name lives on as the father of Persia, a ruler whose complex legacy transcends simple notions of hero or tyrant. As our journey through Cyrus the Great's world closes, take one last breath of the desert winds and steel yourself before the king who dared to say, "I am Cyrus, king of the world." His empire was built not only with swords, but with ideals, fairness, unity, and respect that still whisper through the corridors of history. Tonight, let the spirit of Cyrus the Great guide your dreams, filling them with courage, wisdom, and the vision to lead with justice even in the darkest times. Louis XIV, the reign of the Sun King. The monarch whose reign stretched longer than any European king's, whose insatiable hunger for absolute power transformed France into a dazzling empire, and whose shadow still haunts history. His story is one of opulence and cruelty, grandeur and manipulation, a tale of a man who claimed divine authority yet sowed the seeds of his kingdom's unraveling. Close your eyes and step into a world of gilded halls, whispered intrigues, and a ruler who demanded the world revolve around him like the sun. Born on September 5th, 1638, to King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria, Louis entered a fragile world. His birth was hailed as a miracle, the long-awaited God-given heir, but the years ahead would reveal a boy shaped by fear and distrust. At the tender age of 5, orphaned of true power by his father's death, the young king became a pawn in a ruthless game. His mother and Cardinal Mazarin wielded the reins, while France spiraled into the chaos of the Fronde, bloody civil wars where noble factions tore the kingdom apart, leaving scars deep in Louis's psyche. Those years of rebellion and betrayal seared into him a burning resolve. No one would ever again challenge the throne. When Cardinal Mazarin died in 1661, the 22-year-old Louis seized control with cold precision. "L'État, c'est moi. I am the state," he declared, his voice echoing with a chilling finality. From that moment, he crushed the power of the nobility, forcing their loyalty through intrigue, spectacle, and ruthless suppression. Louis fashioned himself as the Sun King, a living god whose radiance illuminated the entire realm. His will was law, absolute and unyielding. The court at Versailles became a gilded prison, a labyrinth of endless ceremonies and rituals designed to bind the nobility in chains of vanity and dependence. Nobles, stripped of real power, competed in a ceaseless dance of flattery and deceit to win the king's favor, their lives dictated by his whims. Versailles was a palace of mirrors reflecting not only Louis's grandeur, but his paranoia. Every whisper might be a threat, every smile a mask. His reign was marked by a series of costly and bloody wars: the War of Devolution, the Franco-Dutch War, the 9 Years' War, and the War of the Spanish Succession. Though victorious in many battles, His ambition drained the treasury and the people's spirits. Peasants labored under crushing taxes to fund the king's endless wars and extravagant lifestyle, while the court danced and feasted. Louis's revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685 unleashed religious persecution, forcing thousands of Protestants into exile or underground worship. The dream of religious unity was stained with fear, oppression, and betrayal. Yet Louis was a patron of the arts, cultivating an age of cultural brilliance. He surrounded himself with the greatest minds, Molière, Racine, Lully, crafting an image of enlightened majesty even as shadows lengthened behind the palace walls. His influence extended far beyond France. Monarchs across Europe modeled their rule after his, embracing absolute power as divine right. But the lavish spending, unchecked ambition, and court intrigues planted seeds of dissent that would grow into the fires of revolution less than a century later. When Louis XIV died on September 1st, 1715, he left behind not just a kingdom, but a cautionary tale. His epitaph could be heard in the silent suffering of the oppressed, the fragile state of his heirs, and the cracks forming beneath his palace's glittering surface. He once asked, bitter and isolated, "Has God forgotten all I have done for him?" The answer echoed through the centuries, a king who ruled like the sun, bright and burning, but destined to fade. As our journey through the Sun King's world draws to a close, take one last look at the man who wielded absolute power like a weapon, dazzling and deadly. His legacy is etched in gold and blood, in beauty and betrayal, in a France both magnificent and fractured. Tonight, let the spirit of Louis XIV guide your dreams, filling them with splendor, ambition, and the dark truth behind the crown. Henry VIII, the king who changed England forever. Step into the shadowed corridors of Tudor power, where ambition twisted into paranoia, and the crown's glitter masked a kingdom ruled by fear and blood. Henry VIII was not just a king. He was a force of nature, passionate, cruel, and unyielding. His reign is carved into history not only for religious revolution, but for the ruthless destruction of lives in his quest for power and legacy. Born a second son, Henry's rise to the throne was shaped by fate's cruel hand. His elder brother Arthur's death thrust him into the spotlight. From the start, the pressures of kingship molded him into a man driven by the desperate need to secure his dynasty. The court was a stage of splendor and danger. Behind the lavish banquets and sparkling jewels lurked whispered plots and deadly secrets. Henry's 6 marriages were not mere personal affairs, but lethal political battlegrounds where love and death entwined. Catherine of Aragon, his first queen, once a powerful symbol of alliance, was cast aside with cold cruelty. After decades of marriage, Henry's obsession with producing a male heir became a nightmare. When the Pope refused to annul the union, Henry tore England from Rome's authority, igniting a religious civil war that would scar the nation. Anne Boleyn, the fiery woman who captured Henry's heart and ignited the Reformation, met a fate as grisly as it was swift. Charged with adultery, incest, and witchcraft, accusations steeped more in fear and courtly treachery than truth. Anne was executed by beheading in 1536. Some whispered the king's paranoia twisted into madness, feeding a hunger to eliminate threats real or imagined. Her daughter Elizabeth, born amidst the flames of betrayal, would inherit a crown forged in blood. Jane Seymour, the king's true love, died giving birth to Edward, the son Henry had long desired. Even in grief, Henry's court was a crucible of ruthless ambition, alliances shifting like sand, each faction waiting for the king's favor or fall. Anne of Cleves was a political pawn, summoned from distant lands only to be rejected for her appearance and annulled within months. Yet she lived, spared by Henry's rare mercy or political calculation, a stark contrast to the fate of Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard, barely more than a girl, was accused of adultery and swiftly executed in 1542. Her youth and indiscretions were weapons wielded by ruthless courtiers eager to please a king whose temper was a tempest. The Tower's shadow lengthened for many who displeased Henry. The king's later years were marked by physical decay and mental torment. His once mighty body was ravaged by a festering leg wound, obesity, and likely complications from diabetes or syphilis. His temper became a weapon as sharp as any sword, turning friends into enemies and subjects into victims. Rebellions like the Pilgrimage of Grace were crushed with merciless efficiency. Thousands were executed or imprisoned, their pleas for justice drowned in the king's desire for control. The dissolution of the monasteries was more than a religious reform. It was a brutal expropriation of wealth that devastated communities and destroyed centuries of faith and tradition. Behind the pageantry, Henry was a man consumed by insecurity and cruelty, wielding power with little regard for life or conscience. His court was rife with spies, informants, and secret trials, a kingdom where trust was a fatal weakness. Henry's death in 1547 ended an era of ruthless transformation. His legacy is a tapestry woven with glory and horror, a nation forever altered by a king who believed himself God's instrument, but whose reign brought both renaissance and ruin. Remember him as the man who declared, "I see my end is coming," but whose shadow would linger for centuries. A cautionary tale of ambition unbound and the perilous cost of absolute power. As you drift off into sleep, let the restless spirit of Henry VIII stir your dreams, a reminder of the thin line between grandeur and madness, and the blood beneath the crown's glitter. Peter the Great, the Tsar who transformed Russia. Step into the cold corridors of imperial power, a place where bloodlines were currency, tradition was a chain, and one man, Peter the Great, would burn it all to the ground to build something newer, stronger, and terrifyingly unfamiliar. Peter Alexeyevich Romanov was born in 1672 into a fractured royal court. His father, Tsar Alexis I, had children by 2 wives, setting the stage for a volatile, dynastic war. When Tsar Fyodor III died without an heir, the throne became a prize contested by Peter's Narishkin relatives and the powerful Miloslavsky clan backing his half-sister, Sophia. The Streltsy, an elite military corps, were bribed and manipulated into storming the Kremlin, slaughtering Peter's uncles before his eyes. He was just 10 years old. Sophia seized power as regent, and Peter was exiled to the countryside while she ruled through his sickly half-brother, Ivan V. But Peter watched. He learned. And at 17, with the support of the military and the church, he overthrew Sophia, locked her in a convent, and declared himself sole ruler of Russia. What followed was not reform, it was violent rebirth. Peter was obsessed with the West. He saw in Europe something Russia lacked: naval supremacy, scientific advancement, powerful centralized monarchies. So he left his country, rare for a czar, and traveled in disguise across Europe during the Grand Embassy of 1697 to 1698. He worked in Dutch shipyards under a false name. He studied dentistry, anatomy, artillery. He didn't attend royal courts as a guest. He watched the sailors, the surgeons, the engineers. When he returned to Russia, He tore into its traditions with surgical violence. He forced the nobility to abandon their long robes and sacred beards, symbols of orthodox tradition. Those who resisted paid a beard tax, or had them cut off in public by Peter himself. Foreign clothing became mandatory at court. The Julian calendar replaced the old Byzantine system. Russian isolation was over by decree. He built a navy from nothing, literally. He supervised the construction of ships on the Sea of Azov and ordered the creation of ports, academies, and shipyards. He modernized the army, hired foreign officers, and trained peasants in the latest European tactics. He created new civil ranks, stripping the old boyars of their inherited authority. The Orthodox Church, long untouchable, was gutted. Peter abolished the Patriarchate and replaced it with a Holy Synod under state control. Religion was no longer above the state, it was the state. The resistance was immense, and Peter's response was brutal. The Streltsy revolted again in 1698. He returned from Europe and crushed them. Over 1,000 were tortured and executed. Some were left hanging in Red Square as rotting warnings. He personally took part in the interrogations, using a mace to extract confessions. The message was clear: Russia would change or die. But his most chilling act came against his own blood. His son, Alexei, resented Peter's westernization. He longed for the old Russia, for Moscow, for orthodoxy untouched by reform. In 1718, Alexei was accused of treason, allegedly conspiring with foreign powers and conservative nobles to undermine Peter's regime. Alexei fled, but was captured. Peter had him tortured for weeks. The details are grisly. Beatings, exposure, confessions extracted under agony. Alexei died in the Peter and Paul fortress, likely murdered on his father's orders. No ceremony, no heir. Meanwhile, Peter launched a 21-year war against Sweden, the Great Northern War, to give Russia access to the Baltic. Early Russian defeats were devastating. At Narva in 1700, thousands were slaughtered. But Peter adapted, rebuilt, learned. By 1709, at the Battle of Poltava, Russia crushed Sweden's army. It marked the end of Sweden's dominance and Russia's emergence as a true European empire. With the spoils of war, Peter built a city on a swamp. St. Petersburg was carved from frozen marshland by conscripted peasants and prisoners. Thousands died in the mud, devoured by disease, exhaustion, or exposure. The Neva River ran red more than once, but Peter's dream would not die. The city rose with Baroque facades, European palaces, canals, and boulevards. In 1712, Peter made it the capital. The old Russia was buried in the snow behind him. His reforms remade the army, restructured society, imposed secular education, created a bureaucracy where advancement came from loyalty and competence, not birth. He even created a table of ranks, ensuring any man, regardless of class, could rise by merit, so long as they served the state above all else. Peter died in 1725 after plunging into icy water to rescue drowning soldiers. He contracted pneumonia and lingered in agony for weeks. His final words were scrawled by a trembling hand. "Leave all to..." The sentence was never finished. In the end, Peter left Russia transformed and scarred. He built an empire through blood and brilliance, cruelty and conviction. He left no heir strong enough to carry his vision forward. But the machinery he built, the navy, the capital, the state, was too massive to destroy. He once said, "I have conquered an empire, but I have not been able to conquer myself." Let those words haunt your thoughts tonight. He reshaped a nation, but never escaped the ghosts that shaped him. Let them whisper in your dreams. King Solomon, the wisest king of all time. Let us journey back to a kingdom at its height, glittering with gold, heavy with incense, and echoing with sacred chants. A throne of ivory and lions stood beneath the sun, but behind it sat a man burdened with divine gifts and human flaws. This is the story of King Solomon, a ruler whose wisdom became legend, and whose legacy trembled under the weight of his choices. He was born around 990 BC, a child of scandal and divine intent. His mother was Bathsheba, once the wife of a loyal soldier named Uriah. His father, King David, had coveted her from a rooftop and conspired to have Uriah killed. From that betrayal came a son who would inherit not only a crown, but the judgment of God and the expectations of a nation. Solomon was not the eldest son. He was not the heir by birthright, but he was the one chosen by his father and by the prophets, who whispered that it was this boy, this child of shame and grace, who would sit on Israel's throne. As King David withered in his final days, his court descended into chaos. Adonijah, another son, declared himself king without consent. The palace became a den of plots and trembling loyalties. But Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan moved quickly, reminding David of his promise. The old king acted with his last strength. He anointed Solomon as ruler before the nation, silencing the rebellion before it could spill blood. Solomon was crowned not in battle, but in ceremony, yet his reign would be anything but peaceful. Shortly after taking the throne, Solomon had a dream. In that dream, God appeared, offering him anything his heart desired. The young king, no older than 20, could have asked for vengeance, glory, or the death of his enemies. Instead, he asked for wisdom. Not for his own sake, but to govern the people with justice. God was pleased, and in return, Solomon was granted not just wisdom, but riches and honor beyond any king before or after. And with that gift came the burden. His wisdom was real, deep, piercing, sometimes terrifying. In his most famous judgment, 2 women stood before him, both claiming the same infant as their own. With cold logic, Solomon ordered the child be cut in half. One mother screamed in agony, begging the child be given to the other. That cry exposed the truth. The child was spared. The court fell silent. The king had ruled. His fame spread like fire across the desert. Delegations arrived from Egypt, Arabia, Phoenicia. They came not just for trade, but for truth, and none were more famous than the Queen of Sheba. She came from the south, perhaps Ethiopia, perhaps Saba, bringing camels laden with spices, gold, and sharp questions. She wanted to test the mind of this so-called wise king. What she found was a palace like no other, a court that mirrored heaven, and a king who answered riddles like breathing. Her report was simple. The half was not told to me. But wisdom did not make Solomon a saint. His greatest achievement, the temple in Jerusalem, was built with beauty and blood. Cedar from Lebanon, gold from Ophir, stones from the depths of the earth. It took 7 years to build and thousands of workers to raise. Some labored under forced conscription. The temple became a house for God, yes, but also a monument to Solomon's reach. And that reach extended further than the prophets ever imagined. Solomon married. Then he married again, and again. Over 700 wives, 300 concubines, political alliances woven in silk and compromise. Many of these women worshipped other gods, and Solomon, for all his wisdom, allowed their altars into the land. Then he built shrines for them. Then he worshipped beside them. He had been given the gift of discernment. And yet, in his final years, his heart drifted into shadows. The man who once knelt before the Ark of the Covenant now burned incense to gods with names like Molech, Chemosh, and Ashtoreth. Sacrifices echoed on foreign hills while the God of Israel watched in silence. The punishment was spoken not to Solomon, but to the prophet. The kingdom would be torn apart, not in Solomon's lifetime, but soon after. The price of compromise would be paid in civil war. He reigned for 40 years. He wrote proverbs that still echo in synagogues and cathedrals. He penned Ecclesiastes, a haunting meditation on mortality, vanity, and the fleeting nature of pleasure. The Song of Solomon drips with longing and fire, but the man behind the words aged into melancholy. When he died, his son Rehoboam took the throne. Arrogant, blind to the tension bubbling beneath the surface, Rehoboam raised taxes and cracked the whip. The kingdom snapped. 10 tribes rebelled and formed their own nation. The once mighty Israel was fractured. The temple stood, but the unity was gone. And yet, Solomon's name remains. His wisdom carved into scripture. His temple etched into memory. His throne, his riddles, his failures, they all survive. He once wrote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." But by the end, Solomon feared no one, and perhaps that was his final mistake. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, think of the king who had everything: insight, wealth, honor, and still fell short. Let his story be a warning. That wisdom, without obedience, is a crown of thorns, and that even the brightest minds can be led astray by the soft whisper of desire. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was not born in Egypt's golden age. By the time Cleopatra entered the world in 69 BC, her kingdom was fragile, cracked by debt, riddled with betrayal, and trembling beneath Rome's rising shadow. But from this slow collapse emerged a woman who would defy time itself. She was Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemies, a dynasty not of Egyptians, but of Greeks, foreigners who had ruled for 3 centuries after Alexander the Great. Her bloodline was incestuous by design. Brothers married sisters. Mothers conspired with sons. The throne was soaked in both perfume and poison. Cleopatra, even as a girl, was different. She studied medicine, spoke 9 languages, and walked with the pride of a goddess. She was the first of her line to speak Egyptian. While her siblings wore crowns, she listened to her people. And when she took the throne at 18 beside her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, she knew the knives were already drawn. Their palace in Alexandria was a glittering trap. Courtiers whispered, guards switched loyalties by the hour, and royal dinners often ended with exile or death. Cleopatra was cast out by her own council, but exile did not silence her. It only sharpened her. Then came Caesar. Juluis Caesar, 52 and already steeped in war and scandal, arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC. Rome wanted Egypt pacified. Cleopatra saw an opening in one of the most legendary seductions in history. She had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers, concealed in linen, possibly even in a rug, though some scholars say it was a sack. When he unwrapped her, what lay inside was not just beauty, it was fire. She didn't beg, she didn't plead, she negotiated. Within days, Caesar backed her claim. Ptolemy XIII was forced to face his sister on the battlefield. He drowned in the Nile trying to flee, his gold-plated armor dragging him beneath the current. Cleopatra returned to the throne, this time with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, a boy she would later have poisoned. Cleopatra and Caesar became lovers. She bore him a son, Caesarion, whose very existence terrified the Roman elite. He was living proof that Caesar had fathered a foreign heir. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome, she brought not only her child, but her presence, a queen who demanded to be honored as a goddess in a city built on the fear of monarchy. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, Cleopatra's dreams shattered. His blood still wet on the Senate floor, she fled Rome. In Egypt, she made her son co-ruler. She was done pretending to share power. Then Mark Antony emerged. Antony was no Caesar. He was younger, hungrier, and far more reckless. When he summoned Cleopatra to answer for Egypt's shifting alliances, she did not come humbly. She arrived on a barge coated in gold, her sails perfumed with incense, her body draped in the robes of Isis. She knew the myths. She made herself one. Antony was lost the moment he saw her. Their bond was instant and destructive. While Roman senators called her a witch, Antony crowned her Queen of Kings. Together, they divided the East between themselves and their children, proclaiming a new world order. It was political heresy. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and Rome's most dangerous man, declared war not just on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself. He painted her as the Serpent Queen. He claimed she had bewitched Antony with sex, sorcery, and gold. The Senate bought it. Rome was hungry for vengeance. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Cleopatra's fleet broke formation and fled. Antony followed. The war was lost, but the worst was still to come. Back in Egypt, surrounded by the enemy, Antony received false news. Cleopatra was dead. In a private chamber, he drew his sword and fell upon it. The blade struck, but did not kill him. Bleeding out, he was carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she had locked herself away. She cradled him as he died, his blood staining the marble beneath her throne. Octavian soon entered Alexandria. He wanted Cleopatra alive, to chain her, display her, parade her through Rome. But Cleopatra, even in defeat, would not be conquered. She prepared her death like a ceremony. Wearing royal robes, she ordered a venomous asp to be smuggled in a fig basket. Some historians argue it was poison she smeared on a hairpin. Others believe she used a blade. No one knows for sure. What is certain is that she died as she lived, on her terms. Her servants found her body alongside two of her most loyal women, all collapsed on the cool stone of her chamber. She was 39. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt was seized. Caesarion was hunted down and executed, despite promises of mercy. Rome swallowed the Nile, but Cleopatra was never buried quietly. Her legacy slithered through centuries of rumor, romance, and reinvention. She became a symbol of seduction, then a feminist icon, then a myth again. But the truth is sharper. Cleopatra was a ruler, a calculating, intelligent, ambitious monarch in a world that punished women for all three. She was not the temptress of Roman slander. She was not a slave to her lovers. She was a queen who used love as a weapon, language as armor, and death as escape. She once said, "I will not be triumphed over," and she never was. Tonight, let the spirit of Cleopatra guide your dreams, filling them with confidence, courage, and the bold fire of a queen who refused to be forgotten. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who fought with thought. Long before the rot of corruption poisoned the heart of Rome, there ruled an emperor who tried to save it with philosophy instead of blood. His enemies wielded steel. He fought with reason. But even the sharpest mind can only hold back chaos for so long. Marcus Aurelius was born in 121 AD, not in the shadows of war or the cries of ambition, but into wealth, learning, and expectation. From his earliest years, he was different. While other boys played at swords, Marcus studied Epictetus. He wore plain woolen robes. He slept on hard floors. In a world obsessed with power, he obsessed over virtue. The imperial court whispered about his seriousness. They called him Verissimus, the most truthful one. His rise to power was no accident. Emperor Hadrian, sensing something rare in the boy, arranged for his adoption into the Antonine line. When Antoninus Pius took the throne, Marcus was brought into the palace and trained like a weapon forged in silence. His tutor, Junius Rusticus, a hard-edged Stoic, taught him to kill his desires, suppress ambition, and embrace fate without complaint. But fate, as it often does, wasn't listening. In 161 AD, Marcus became emperor alongside his adopted brother Lucius Verus, the first time Rome had two emperors at once. Lucius partied, Marcus prayed, Lucius chased dancers, Marcus scribbled meditations on death and duty. The empire teetered, a two-headed beast, one sober, one drunk. Then came the wars. The Parthians struck in the east. Lucius went to command and failed. His generals did the work, and Lucius claimed the glory. But the real plague came not from Parthia's spears, but from its breath. Soldiers brought back a sickness that swept across the empire like smoke across dry fields. Rome coughed itself hollow. Bodies filled the streets. Some historians estimate that 5 million died. Marcus stayed. He did not run to the country or hide behind marble. He faced it with logic, with order, with law. Then the Germans came. The tribes north of the Danube smelled weakness. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Vandals, they crossed the river like wolves in winter, burning, killing, tearing open the empire's northern belly. And so the philosopher picked up a sword. Marcus spent more time in tents than palaces, in mud, not marble. He slept beside soldiers, marched through snow, dictated commands in the rain. But even then, in the dark of his campaign tent, he wrote. By candlelight, in blood-stained clothes, he scribbled thoughts meant only for himself, never intended for the world. These pages would become the Meditations, a Stoic manual for suffering, a whispered guide for enduring grief without losing your soul. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be, he wrote. Be one. His wars dragged on. He tried not only to kill Rome's enemies, but to absorb them. Defeated tribes were given land in exchange for loyalty. He offered them Rome, not chains. It was diplomacy as survival, but the violence kept returning. He saw too much death. He aged like stone, and the Stoic inside him was beginning to erode. In 180 AD, on the cold banks of the Danube, Marcus fell ill. His body, worn from years of plague, war, and burden, gave out. On his deathbed, he summoned his son, Commodus. And here, the tragedy deepened. Marcus had trained his soul like a soldier, but he had failed to train his heir. Commodus was the opposite of everything he valued. Vain, violent, addicted to spectacle. Marcus knew it. He feared it, but he had no one else. And so, with the weight of the empire cracking his ribs, he let Rome slip into the hands of a man unworthy to hold it. Marcus Aurelius died that March. His generals wept. The empire mourned. But history blinked and moved on. His son would become a monster. His empire would begin to fracture. And yet, the meditations survived. His private war journal, his lonely scribbles, his whispered truths. Centuries later, men would still open that book and find the words of a ruler who asked for no praise, built no temples to himself, and tried, in a world built on violence, to rule with thought. Thank you for listening. I love you and good night.